Seeing none, we'll have that noted. We'll move on to item 2, approval of the public agenda items, and ask for any items to be pulled for discussion. 7A is a presentation, so this matter will be held. Any other items from the members of the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's an item on number 5, the business arising, that I'd like to discuss, and then 7C. There was something there I wanted to discuss. I think that's it for me.
We'll also add item 8, where we have deputations, and I'd like to also add 12A and B. Any other items to be held? Great. Can I have a mover for the agenda, please? Thank you, Naram. Seconder? Thank you, John. All in favor? Carried. We'll move to the item from the business arising. And Director Campbell, over to you.
Right. Sorry, I don't seem to have, okay, this particular item comes to us from the Center for the Advancement of, is that what it is? From the Center for the Advancement of Black People? Right. And what is, and this is in regard to conducting a survey of vendors? Or the discussion is in regard to conducting a survey of vendors for purposes of identifying their...
So I can start the discussion. I'm not sure that Barry or Joanna are part of the meeting and can add. But part of the CABR strategy and as well our procurement strategy as a corporation is to look for opportunities in procurement decisions to have positive social impact on the communities that we serve, the tenants that we serve. And in part, one of the pieces of work that the governance committee asked staff to report back on is related to the work that we issue through the procurement process, and to identify opportunities to employ vendors from various diverse communities, including the Black community, in our procurement decisions, so that we are expanding our list of vendors that we engage, and that we're using the purchasing power of TCHC, still getting value for money, but identifying where those opportunities exist.
So this is to me a sort of a slippery slope, as they say, because are we going to start asking for the ethnic makeup, composition of companies that are potential suppliers, and then making decisions based on the composition of those companies? I mean, that's what it sounds like.
So I think the focus actually, in terms of the exercise, is to identify vendors from those communities to make sure that they have the opportunity to take part in the procurement process.
Okay.
I don't believe that the intention of the process is to compromise the interests that TCHC has in acquiring goods and services with value to TCHC. So the value principle continues to apply, but we cast a broader net to ensure that corporations that aren't our typical vendor have the opportunity to participate in the process.
So we might work a little harder to encourage certain companies that represent, different demographics that wouldn't normally come to us.
I believe that's the intention.
Okay.
Outreach and engagement of groups to participate in the bidding process.
But we're not going to get into a survey, though, of existing vendors or prospective vendors asking, what their, I don't even know what the legal
So typically the challenge.
I think,
I just want to hear from the legal counsel, please.
Typically, the intention of those kind of inquiries is that it's voluntary.
Okay.
That companies and individuals have the opportunity to identify as individuals who are part of diverse communities and as well you have there are trade and industrial organizations that might be identified through this process as particular sources of vendors who might not otherwise be aware of the work that they can secure through TCHC's procurement process, and there may be a reach out there.
That's great. Okay, thank you for the answer.
Director Smith?
Chair. No, I was just going to say, we just also wanted to look at our procurement processes and policies to see if they need to be adjusted to encourage a broader participation from a wider range of suppliers. Obviously, always looking for value for money.
Yep.
Noted. Thanks, Director Smith. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? So we'll need a motion to receive this. Can I ask for someone to move that motion? Thank you, Naram. Someone to second. Thank you, Brian. All in favor? Carried. We'll move on to 7A, Facility Condition Index role in project prioritization.
Thank you, Chair Macrae. I think Sonia's going to put the presentation up for us. There we go. So this presentation is in response to a question which was raised regarding how we use facility condition index in determining our project prioritization. So you can actually move to the next slide, Sonia. The executive summary was just provided so everyone didn't have to go through the whole presentation if they didn't want to. So I think just to take a step back, key to our capital plan and the projects that we prioritize is the funding that we have. So we have two main funding sources. And you can go on to the next slide if you can, Sonia. So we have two main funding sources. The first, so they are the City of Toronto, which I'll get into, and then we also have the National Co-Investment Funding, National Housing Co-Investment Funding, which I'll speak to, and then we also have some other minor funding that comes from other sources, such as TCHC or some Infrastructure Ontario funding. So the City of Toronto funding, we receive $160 million per year in capital funding. This funding doesn't have any specific requirements that we have to meet in order to receive the funding, other than we obviously have to complete the work. We are paid based on the work that we complete. We do have specific reporting requirements that we need to meet with the city in order to receive this funding. There are, I'll call them funding objectives that are tied to this funding, in that we want to achieve a facility condition index of 10%, and also that we want to avoid permanent unit closures. But I just want to stress, these are not criteria to receive the funding. These are objectives of receiving the funding. And we can move to the next slide. The second large piece we have to our capital funding is through the National Housing Co-Investment Fund that we have. It's a key contributor to our capital funding, our 10-year capital funding plan, and it's $1.34 billion over the 10-year period. We do have similar reporting requirements in that we have to report on a quarterly basis. We submit all of our invoices, and it's a reimbursement in that we are reimbursed based on the work that we complete. With this funding, though, there are requirements that are tied to the funding. So in order that we don't have to pay back any of the forgivable loan piece of this, we do need to maintain a specific unit count. We do need to meet tenant demographics. We do need to meet their affordability requirements, we do have a specific target for accessibility, and we do have a specific target for energy reduction. I am pleased to advise that we're currently meeting all of those funding requirements, and we are actually ahead in terms of where we are to be with accessibility in terms of our units and common areas. And we're also currently ahead of the energy reduction component, which is a 25% energy reduction for the 10-year period. We're halfway through the 10-year period, so we should be at about 12.5%. We're actually at 13.1%, which is where we want to be, because we want to be ahead, because it would be very difficult to catch up if we were behind. So we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So although we have healthy capital plans with this 10-year financing plan that we have right now, unfortunately, we always have more projects than we have funding for. So all of the capital project requests that we have to go through a rigorous prioritization process. As you can see on the right side of the slide, we do have a large number of inputs that go into determining which capital plans we're going to be doing, that forms the list of capital projects that we have. And we get input from from building condition assessments, which I'll talk a little bit about more in detail in the next slide. We get input from our partners in operations and their site staff. We meet with them on an annual basis and go through building by building with the operations staff to determine what their needs are or what they see as needs for the building. We have the information that we get from our building condition assessments. We have the information, we always have a running list, so we have the information that we've obtained previously and keep that in mind. We do get input from our tenants in terms of what they see in the buildings, and then that all goes together to help form the list. And then if we move to the left-hand side of the slide, this is where then we do have to look at our prioritization factors. So we have primary and secondary factors, and high FCI is in the primary list, but it is certainly not a sole driver for why we would do a project. We do need to take a look at first health and safety projects. We do need to look at critical building components. We need to look at potential secondary damage that could be caused by not fixing a problem that we have in a building. We do need to take into consideration the funding requirements, as I mentioned, for the National Housing Co-Investment Funding. We do need to take those into consideration. We do need to look at our no permanent unit closures, and we do take FCI into consideration. So really, to answer the question that was posed, FCI is absolutely considered in project prioritization, but it is certainly not the only factor. And we may need to do projects in buildings with a lower FCI versus projects in a higher building with a higher FCI, because we need to really look at what the project is. And just to give you an example, we could have a building that has a higher FCI because of, components like interiors or things like that. We may have a building that has a lower FCI, but it has a roof that's leaking. Well, obviously, we need to tackle the roof first, because that's going to cause secondary damage that impacts tenant comfort, things like that. So we have to use all of these factors when we're prioritizing the project. And, and then we also have secondary factors that we take a look at, and we're looking at if we're doing projects in a building, perhaps there could be efficiency with combining projects. As you've seen in some of our complete retrofits that we're doing in buildings. And then we look at, what have we seen as high and urgent requests that come from our own facilities management staff, as well as operations and site staff. And then we also take a look at what's being done, what's being put through in terms of the smaller capital, to see if that is indicative of there may be a larger project that we also need to tackle. And we can go to the next slide. So this just gives you a little information. It shows we do building condition assessments. This committee approved an award actually to start building condition assessments again. We do them at the advice of this committee. Some of them for the higher needs buildings will be done every 3 years. Generally, the portfolio is done on a 5-year basis, and these are visual inspections that are done, and it does help us provide information on the building components as well as what their life cycle is, and that helps us when we're looking at doing our multi-year capital plans. So we absolutely do a multi-year capital plan. We look out, we have our 10-year financing plan that we have, and we also take a look out into future years in terms of our capital. One, because we do have projects that span over more than 1 year, and then we also just keep that running list, so we always have a list of what we need to do in the future. And certainly the BCAs are a good part of that, as well as all of the other inputs. And you can move on to the next slide, please. This just gives a recap of Facilities Condition Index, which is actually, it just takes a look at, it's an industry standard to help gauge the condition of the building. But as I said, it's not just a one and done thing. We do need to take a look at what are the underlying items that make up the FCI calculation. And the FCI calculation is simply the required repairs against the asset replacement value. So I think, as everybody in this committee knows, we have a target of getting a 10% FCI at the end of 2026, and that will put us in the fair category in terms of the condition rating and FCI levels that are generally accepted as an industry practice. And we can move on to the next slide. We are absolutely on track, as this committee has seen. We're ahead of our FCI target for where we originally anticipated we would be based on the 2017 forecast that was done, and we are on track to achieve the 10% FCI.
Questions from the committee? Go ahead, John.
You said that this is FCI is an industry standard.
Correct.
So do private companies that own apartment buildings go through this rigorous process as well?
I can't say what they do. I'm sure they do have a process, that they would look at, in terms of, but I don't think that, just speaking from my experience, I don't think they necessarily get input from their residents, the way that we would gather input from our tenants. I do imagine they probably take more of a linear approach and look at sort of what are the, they would do a life cycle analysis and figure out when they need to replace roofs and things like that, because they'd have to have a capital plan for their buildings. But I think ours is pretty rigorous and very consultative, which I'm not sure in the private industry if they would do that much consulting.
But we don't really have any way of knowing what other, we'll call them competitors in the housing business or housing rental business set as a standard for their buildings according to the FCI.
No, I do have a contact in the apartment association. I could check with them to see if they have one just and I think
that would be useful, because this is, I think, at the portfolio and board level, this is the metric we're spending all our time on in terms of understanding the quality we're at and the aspirations. So I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I just have one more question.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
So we've shown marked improvement since 2017. We're now over 5 years. Have any of the measurements changed or any of the parameters changed in that time, or have they been exactly the same parameters and measurements of buildings over that time?
It is the same calculation.
Okay.
And we also have continued to use the same third-party consultant, Amoresco. They've been with us since the beginning, and you may remember you approved a renewal of their contract at this committee, and it was important for us to continue with Amoresco through to the end of our 10-year capital plan, so that I think where you're going is, you could change potentially change some of the inputs to make the numbers look, so this, having Amoresco ensures that we've got consistency from start to finish with it, and that we're comparing apples to apples and not trying to have anything change during it.
Well, congratulations to TCHC for making such a big improvement. That's great news.
It's,
Like the FCI increases because the need for repairs is growing all the time. So it's,
Absolutely.
it's also not a static thing where you're chipping away. Go ahead, Brian.
I guess the question in comparison is, do other municipal nonprofits use FCI? Do you know?
yes, they do, and generally 10% is sort of what they're trying for. There are some smaller housing providers that may even try to look at, try to get a better FCI. I know we've talked to them.
I guess that would be our only comparator. I like someplace like Ottawa or Hamilton or some of the more, they're not our size, but
Yeah, I think it's tough to compare from a size and also considering the history of the deferred capital in the organization. But I think the takeaway though is just understanding the categories of the scale in that what percentages equals fair versus poor versus terrible. I think that would be an interesting sort of follow-up, if you don't mind, Alan.
I just have one other question.
Go ahead, Brian.
As Swansea, the impact of Swansea, how has it been? Because obviously that's a major issue, and obviously, you know, does it then get taken out of that? Because I presume before it was probably within the determinations, but now that it, you know, we've closed it, does it come outside of that calculations, or has it caused a lot of skewing in the comparison?
Through the chair, yes. Now that it's closed, it would come out of the calculation. Prior, it was included. It was a community that had a higher FCI. We did have a project plan in place. Now, again, the work that we were planning to do in the Swansea community, totally unrelated in terms of the failure that happened at Swansea. So the failure that happened was unprecedented and not as a result of any maintenance that had not been done.
I just wondered how it may have either improved or negatively impacted the FCI.
Yeah, technically it would have improved the FCI, but it's one building out of 2,100. Or maybe it's a few buildings, it's a little complex, but it wouldn't, I can't imagine having a sort of a material change the overall FCI.
Through the chair, correct. It's not going to cause us to go from 15% to 10% or something like that.
Do you have something to add to that point?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
thank you.
Chair Macrae. I was going to add in terms of FCI benchmark, as part of the EY financial strategy work, they have done some high-level preliminary benchmarking as well. The 10% FCI is an index has been generally used by the social housing industry. For example, BC Housing and also Ottawa Housing, they're using FCI index 10% as a target.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Just, I wanted to, you know, you've done an incredible job. Like if you look at 2017, you're at 16, down to 13. Wanted to get your thoughts on actually getting to 10 and whether that's going to be materially more challenging, you know, and I wouldn't by any means, you know, deem myself an expert on FCI calculation and how you get there. But the question just really is, you know, is there anything material that needs to be achieved to get to 10? And is that actually within our sights? It is still an aggressive drop in the next 5 years, right? So.
Through the chair, I'm happy to answer that. So there are a couple like we continually review our 10-year plan and keep, you know, projecting for 10 years, looking at our FCI. in conjunction with our third-party provider, Amoresco, as well as with our finance. There are factors, I mean, inflation absolutely is something that will have an impact. We've taken that into consideration and believe that we'll be able to still achieve it. The other piece that is something that we're keenly aware of and watching is also the increase in our demand capital. And a good portion of the demand, and sorry, when I say demand capital, I mean like smaller type capital repairs. So currently we have a threshold at TCHC of $1,500. Something that's over $1,500 is considered capital, under $1,500 is considered operating. Again, with inflation, that $1,500, you can't take all of those repairs and capitalize them. And also they don't have not all demand capital will have an impact on FCI. So that's something that we're being very cognizant of and watching, because that does have an impact on our FCI. Everything, all the modeling that we've done still indicates that we will be able to achieve the 10%, but we have to be vigilant on it. And those are two factors that we're definitely watching closely.
Yeah, the combination of inflation plus things not making it to their end of their useful life unexpectedly are probably two big factors.
Chair, agreed.
Go ahead, Brian.
Is there any, because obviously because of inflation, the movement of the 1,500 between the operating and capital? Like, I mean, should we be moving that up to 2,000 or, you know, because obviously, or do we need to keep it the same in order to be the evaluation? But obviously we can't keep inflation has its own, you know, issues. And so I just didn't know whether the 1,500, so more things should be considered operating rather than capital, the smaller items, because of.
Through the chair, I can respond to that. It is something absolutely that we've looked at, and we're working closely with our partners in finance, with Lily's team, to take a look at that, because there are implications. You know, if you increase the 1,500, then that puts a further strain on operating. So that is something that has to be taken into consideration. But I know the team within facilities management and the finance team that Lily oversees have continued to work closely on that, and that's something it's been reviewed a number of times and will continue to be reviewed to determine, you know, what the future direction would be.
Because I guess as we throw more and more things into the capital side, it makes it more challenging for you to get closer to the 10%.
Through the chair, correct.
Any other questions? I'd like to say thank you for that analysis. I think, you know, it's good for this committee and ultimately the board to really understand FCI and how it works. It's the main barometer for capital spend in the portfolio, and that's a big priority given the condition of the buildings. But the point of this part of this specific presentation, which I think was important, is that's not necessarily the only driver of making decisions on where capital is spent. It's the urgency of the repair, its secondary impacts, et cetera. So just because a building has a high FCI doesn't mean necessarily that that's where the capital is going. It might be going to something more urgent. And that's part of the facilities management's got to manage those competing demands. With that, I'll ask for someone to propose the motion to receive. Thank you, John. Second. Thank you, Naram. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Was it 7C? 7. We'll move to 7C. Back to you, Alan, or John, did you want to raise a question?
Just a question. It's on, what are local move-outs?
Sure. So local move-outs are the repairs that are done when a tenant vacates a unit, and then the unit has to be turned to get it ready for the new tenant coming in. So it's a program that's managed through the operations department, and they have a very defined and regimented process that they go through to bring the unit to a standard where it can be rented. And that could be very minor repairs or it could be very major repairs in the unit, depending on, you know, the amount that's required.
So according to the information, we're budgeting $32.5 million for local move-outs,
Correct.
which we have an annual review of every unit,
Correct.
right? And in that annual review, we spot things that need repairs. We spot, you know, doorknobs that need replacing, air conditioning units, stoves, refrigerators. So if we're doing that, why is this number must represent a staggering number of units and move-outs. And it would be good to know the number, actually, that this 32 million represents. And the question is, so if we're doing these annual reviews and annual upkeep of repairs on units, why is this number so high?
Do you want? Oh, okay. Certainly, I know in the annual unit inspections, there may be items that may not be repaired. Either the tenant may not want them, or they may be in an acceptable condition. And I know Nadia will be able to assist more because their inspections are done through her team, and then her team also looks after the move-out process. Now, there are certain things that are done at a unit turn, for example, painting. You would probably paint the entire unit. You could be replacing old flooring, things like that, that may not be done when a tenant is in the unit. In terms of the number of units, we can certainly get that. I don't know if, I doubt Nadia would have that off the top of her head.
I think what I'll do is I'll put it in an email.
Sure.
And ask and rather than you spending a lot of time on it now, you know, when you get around to it, a briefing note, it would be good to know the number of units and a breakdown, and I'll put this in an email, Alan, and a breakdown of the costs. Because again, I mean, I for sure I would like to know the number of units. It's a lot, because it's a lot of money to spend, and just have a better understanding of how it's being spent. I mean, and I'll just leave it at that. But I'll definitely put that in the email, okay?
Absolutely. Happy to work with our partner and our partners in operations and answer whatever questions you have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to receive this report. Thank you, Nurim. Thank you, John. All in favor? Carried. We'll move to item 8, and we'll start off with a deputation.
Good morning, Ms. Wilkinson. We're ready for your deputation. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. So I wanted to thank BIFAC for asking management to bring back this report. It's an excellent question, and I do appreciate the thoroughness of the report. And as we all know, that tenants don't often depute on BIFAC agenda items, so that certainly caught my attention. I wanted to talk to a couple of things. On page 2, the state of good repair. For those of you who are not familiar with the program, it's an excellent program, and it's been in place for many years. It is popular amongst tenants because it actually provides them with an opportunity to identify repairs needed in their units. TCHC can be proud of the program and all that it has accomplished, and it's one of those things we don't talk about it often, but we should, because it's a program that's well received and much appreciated by our tenants. I believe the program was halted for a period of time and has since been reactivated. It would be nice to have statistics on the number of buildings and units that have participated in this program since inception. I don't agree with allowing tenants to opt out. If the standard 24-hour notice of entry is given, a unit inspection can take place. That's what landlords do. So it is Toronto Community Housing's responsibility to keep all units in a state of good repair. So when tenants are permitted to opt out, the question is at what cost to Toronto Community Housing, who will need to do those repairs in units at some point in the future at a higher cost? So thinking of bathrooms or kitchens and things like that. So tenants admittedly are frustrated because currently they do not have a mechanism available where they can provide feedback on the quality of work performed by vendors in their units. So after work has been performed, and there may be some small deficiencies or issues arising, things happen while the work is being performed, even if the problem is addressed. Tenant concerns do not reach the TCH decision makers who hire these vendors. And I do think that is a missed opportunity because there you're going to capture the lived experience of tenants. I'm pleased to see we're going to implement a pilot to gather information on how such a program could be implemented portfolio-wide in the future. I note it's being launched late fall this year into Q1 24, and this is likely the highest call volumes in the call center, you know, primarily related to heat loss, radiators not working, and that sort of thing. I hope that staff will consider creating some sort of a tenant staff working group to brainstorm on vendor feedback surveys and a variety of ways in which tenants can participate and provide feedback beyond staff phoning them between the hours of 4 to 8. An example might be to consider providing an electronic maintenance feedback form on the website, and once completed, gets sent to a dedicated department for review. This would allow tenants to access and fill in this form at their convenience. I will remind staff and committee members when agenda items come forward to consider them through a tenant lens. As this item is of significant importance to tenants, I am asking if BIFAC would consider referring it to the Tenant Services Committee, as it has oversight of customer service and daily maintenance provided to tenants. Once there, it will likely receive additional tenant deputations and input to help bring this program to fruition. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much for the deputation, and as you note, we don't often get deputations at BIFAC, so thank you for participating and bringing your contribution. In terms of the point on people opting out and thus TCHC not being aware of necessary, required, preventable repairs, would that get caught in the annual inspection of units, or not necessarily because it might not catch it year to year?
So
Is that for me or staff?
Sorry, that's for Nadia.
So through you, Chair Macrae, I would have Alan speak to what items are actually covered in the state of good repair work. We do capture items. So there was an earlier point around the annual unit inspection process and what we're able to capture in terms of preventative work. I think what we realized going into this year, we had automated the work orders related to that. And budget-wise, that isn't necessarily the way to go. So we need to put ourselves in a better position to triage work orders that we identify and the work that's identified. So that's what we're working on now. So we still continue to identify the work. It doesn't necessarily mean it will be done within that fiscal year, depending on budget constraints. So Alan, I don't know if they're specific to the work.
Thank you, Nadia, and through the chair, I can say we do use the information from the annual unit inspections. Like, for example, part of the annual unit inspection is to rate the condition of kitchens, bathrooms, things like that. We do take that information into account when we are working to determine which buildings should form part of the State of Good Repair program. I agree with everything that I've heard about the State of Good Repair program. I think it's an excellent program. Honestly, I wish we had more funding, that we could do more.
That little detail.
Pardon?
That little detail.
Yes, absolutely. And it is the only program that we have that deals with interiors in the units. So, you know, we have a lot of capital programs that deal with the building envelope, the grounds, the parking garages, all that, accessibility and everything. But State of Good Repair is the only program that is targeted specifically at the interiors of tenant units, and I think it's a great program. And like I say, I'll make one more plug. I wish we had more money to do more, because certainly it's a program that is very well received.
Any other questions on this item?
Chair Macrae, can I make a quick comment to the deputant? The idea of a tenant staff working group related to this is a great idea, and we will absolutely pursue it and follow up with Ms. Wilkinson in terms of how to actualize that.
Great, thank you very much. And I just have to say, like, reading the report and specifically the survey results of tenants being 90% satisfied, 75% very satisfied, 92%, they would recommend the program to other tenants, I think is a real testament to the delivery of that program and a really positive indication. So thank you to the staff involved in that. With that, we'll move to receive that information. May I get a mover? Thank you. A seconder? Thank you, Brian. All in favor? Carried. And we'll move on to 12A and the internal audit. So if you don't mind just providing us an update or a walkthrough of the materials, that'd be fantastic.
This is the 6-monthly status update on the items which were previously. Okay. So this is a 6-monthly update of the items which were previously reported in the public session of BIFAC. There is one report for which the status has been provided. Sorry, my apologies. I switched to 12A. This is the quarterly report for BIFAC, which provides the status update of the annual audit plan, which was approved by BIFAC in January. This is provided to BIFAC on a routine basis to apprise as to what's the progress being made on each of the audits that is in the plan. For the change order process review, it's almost done. We are waiting for some input so that the report can be finalized. It's planned to go to the next BIFAC in November. And there was another report which was presented this morning, fire life safety report. And aside from that, we're currently working on 2 other audit projects. As mentioned here, it's in the planning stage. One of the report will be presented to BIFAC in November, and probably the next one will go in January.
Very good.
Any questions?
Any questions from the floor? Seeing none, we'll move to have that received. Can I have someone move that motion? Thank you, Naram. Someone second. Thank you, Brian. All in favor? Carried. And then 12B.
Okay. So 12B is a half-yearly report that comes to BIFAC. Provides status update on the open recommendations which have previously been provided to BIFAC. The reports were presented in the public session. There is only one report in here, which is the tenant parking charges monitoring audit. 6 recommendations were provided. Currently 5 are in progress. 1 has not started. The status is the same as it was presented as of December 31st, 2022. This is the status as of June 30, 2023. No change.
And it looks like most of the target dates are Q3, Q4 this year. So the expectation is that these items will be closed off this year?
Yeah, so as per our follow-up process, we will follow up with the management, and whatever is the status, we will provide to BIFAC. Currently, that's the timeline which has been provided to us. So the next follow-up cycle, we will follow up and present the result to BIFAC in March of 2024.
Very good. Any other questions? Seeing none, motion to receive. Thank you, Naram. Second. Thank you, Brian. All in favor? Carried. With that, I think we're at the end of our public session agenda for this meeting of BIFAC. So I will look for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, Naram. Second. Thank you, Brian. All in favor? Carried. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, management, for all the work preparing the materials, and members for attending and participating, and the public, whoever's watching. Thanks for your viewership.